Good evening and a warm welcome to tonight's event brought to you by ALS United Greater Chicago as part of our Living Well with ALS webinar series. We sincerely appreciate your presence with us tonight. For those who may be new to our organization, this webinar is a part of our quarterly webinar series tailored to offer practical and valuable insights for individuals and families impacted by ALS. Thank you for joining us as we strive to support and inform our community. Tonight's installment is titled Communicating with ALS, Keeping the Conversation Going. The focus of this presentation is on addressing challenges in verbal communication and exploring alternative communication methods. We aim to share ideas and strategies that will assist you and your loved ones in navigating the communication hurdles associated with ALS. Before we delve into the presentation and introduce tonight's speakers, let's quickly address a few housekeeping matters. Firstly, please note that all participants will be automatically muted throughout the session to minimize background noise. Should you have any question during the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A tab located on the bottom right side of your screen. We will address these inquiries at the conclusion of the program. In the event that we are unable to address all your questions within the allocated time, rest assured that we will follow up with responses via email. Additionally, a recording of today's session will be made available at a later date. Those who have registered with us will receive email notifications regarding the availability of the recording. Thank you for your attention to these details, and let's proceed with the session. Tonight, we are honored to have two amazing speakers, Stephanie Barb and Elizabeth Wu. Stephanie is a speech-language pathologist specializing in the use of augmentative and alternative communication. She has over 25 years of experience in education and clinical settings, utilizing technology to increase an individual's communication and accessibility. In addition to her clinical practice, she has presented on this topic at local conferences and workshops. Currently, she is an SLP for Special Education Association of Peoria County in Peoria, Illinois, a board maker trainer for Tobii Dynavox, and is contracted with ALS United Greater Chicago to support individuals living with ALS. Liz is also speech-language pathologist with ALS United Greater Chicago and North Shore University Health System. She received her master's degree from Northwestern University in 2013 in speech-language pathology. Liz specializes in working with people with neurologic diseases, such as ALS, Parkinson's disease, stroke, and head injury. She is passionate about supporting communication in ALS and educating patients on voice and message banking. Ladies, we sincerely appreciate your presence tonight. The mic is now yours, and we look forward to hearing about the valuable insights you will share with us.
Well, thank you, Joumana, and welcome everyone to our presentation tonight on communicating with ALS. Liz and I are super excited to have you. But we're going to be discussing some of the communication challenges that are often faced by individuals living with ALS. We have a specific focus on strategies and available technologies that will allow you to keep the conversation going. Here's just a quick peek at the agenda tonight. Liz and I are going to tag team a little bit and talk about different topic areas, but we are going to start off defining communication, and then we will identify some of the communication challenges that are often experienced by individuals living with ALS. We're going to identify some terms that you may hear related to speech or communication. We're going to discuss message and voice banking, as well as augmentative and alternative communication supports. And then we're going to wrap up with just a brief discussion of some roles and responsibilities, and we will end with a Q&A session. I'm going to start by just defining communication. I think that you will see that there are lots of different definitions of communication, but for our purposes, we are going to consider communication an exchange of thoughts, messages, or information that is accomplished through speech, signals, writing, or behavior. Certainly, I think that we can agree that communication is the foundation of all human relationships. Something that's super important to understand is that communication is multimodal for all of us. We all use more than one mode to communicate on any given day in any given exchange. We'll use speech or facial expressions, gestures, writing, or technology to communicate with those around us. We also communicate for a variety of purposes. We communicate to request information, of course, to protest, gain attention from those around us, to make comments or to state our opinions, to gather information, to express feelings, and to share information and our stories. Some of the changes with speech and regarding ALS is that they're common and they do progress over time. And the reason that this occurs is that ALS damages or destroys those nerve cells that control muscle movement. Weakness or tightness in the muscles, which are responsible for speech production, cause dysarthria. And that's one of the terms that we'll define here shortly. But what that results in is slow or slurred speech. Another thing to consider is reduced breath support, and that's caused by weakened lung muscles. What that may do is decrease the volume of an individual's speech, and it also might limit their ability to produce longer sentences. There are some psychological impacts of those speech changes, and those include grief, of course, feelings of being frustrated when you're unable to communicate with those around you in an effective way, feelings of being socially isolated, and then dependent on others to interpret your thoughts or feelings. And we're going to touch on some strategies that will hopefully eliminate some of those psychological impact, giving the individual with ALS control over their communication. Definitely want to talk about some terms that you may come across in your journey. As speech pathologists, we're pretty good at using acronyms and words that maybe are common to us, but maybe not common to everyone else. So these are some things or some words that you might hear while working with different professionals along your journey. But I just mentioned dysarthria, and that is the condition in which the muscles that are used for speech are weak, which again results in slow or slurred speech, and that just makes your speech difficult to understand. You may hear the term SLP, and that's what Liz and I are. We are speech language pathologists, and an SLP is a specialist who evaluates and treats individuals with speech, language, cognitive communication, and swallowing disorders. You may hear or see the term AAC, and what that stands for is augmentative and alternative communication. There is a good portion of this webinar tonight that is going to talk more about AAC and what options you have related to the technology that's available. SGD is another term or an acronym that you may see. That stands for speech generating device. And a speech generating device is a high-tech form of AAC. And again, we'll talk more about that here in just a little bit. You'll also hear the terms message and voice banking, and they differ. Liz is going to talk a lot more on that, but what it is just the process of creating digital recordings or a customized digital voice, which can later be installed or imported on a speech generating device if you go that route. And then alternative access is also a term you might hear. And this is just using a different or an alternative area of the body or specialized technology that will allow you to access either the low-tech or the high-tech AAC systems. And at this point, I am going to turn it over to Liz. She is going to talk more about some of the changes that occur with speech in the different stages. And then she'll also talk about message and voice banking, and then I'll come back on in just a little bit. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Liz is going to take over.
Okay, so I'm going to go through the different stages of communication change with ALS. So you can go to the next slide. So stage 1 is no detectable speech disorder. So this means you haven't noticed any change in your speech. At this stage, voice banking, which I am going to talk about in a little bit here in more detail. But basically that is banking or saving your voice on different recordings to put onto a communication device in the future. Next slide. Stage 2 is obvious speech disorder with intelligible speech. So this means you are noticing changes in your speech. You may notice that your speech is becoming slurred. You may notice that your rate of speech is changing. You might be talking slower than you did before. Your voice might be changing. So you might have a strained voice or a hoarse vocal quality. And at this stage, you would work with a speech pathologist on strategy training. So they may work with you on pacing yourself when you talk, putting spaces between your words to help your speech become more clear. They may work with you on your breath support, so taking more breath as you talk to help support your voice. If you're having volume change, they may recommend a voice amplifier. This is like what an exercise trainer or a teacher wears. So there's a microphone in front of your mouth. It makes you louder. It can help with the fatigue with talking, and it can make people hear and understand you better. Next slide. Stage 3 is reduction in speech intelligibility. So this means that you're noticing speech changes and other people are having more difficulty with understanding you. They may be asking you to repeat yourself. What did you say? Sometimes people might pretend that they understand you, but they really don't understand you. At this level, I think it's a really great time to work with your speech pathologist looking at communication tools. So you may do an evaluation where you're looking at different low and high tech forms of communication. Low tech being using a letter board or a phrase board, maybe writing in a notebook. Maybe you've got an app on your phone, and then up through higher tech, which would be like a speech generating device, which Stephanie is going to talk about in a little bit. Next slide. Stage 4 is residual natural speech and AAC. So you may be speaking by mouth, but you may also be supplementing. So a lot of times my patients at this stage, they're talking with me, but then there's something I don't understand, and they're whipping out their phone and typing it and showing me, or they're writing a message in a notebook to show me. At this stage, your speech therapist is working with you on tweaking and developing your communication tools. You may also need to start thinking about different access methods. So if your hands or your arms are becoming too weak to hold a pen or to type on an iPad or an iPhone, you may need to think about something. Again, it could be low tech, like having a laser pen on your glasses and you're using that to access a letterboard. It could be something higher tech where your eyes are accessing a computer to communicate. Next slide. Stage 5 is loss of useful speech. So this means that your mouth is likely very weak. So the tongue may not be moving enough to articulate. You may be able to make sounds out of your voice, but you're not being understood by other people verbally. So at this stage, you are using that other communication method, whatever you picked out, the phone, the letterboard, the speech generating device. And it's good to have a combination of speech tools. Technology doesn't always work. Things are not always charged. So you're going to have, even if you are using technology, you may want to use some kind of a backup system. And it's just the best to work with a speech pathologist who is knowledgeable on ALS and communication tools so that they can really guide you in this process to pick something out before you're even needing to use it. Next slide. So next, I'm going to switch gears here and talk about message and voice banking. So I'm going to define them, I'm going to differentiate them, and I'm going to show you videos because I have found that showing and hearing voice and message banking, it makes a lot more sense than just talking about it. So message banking is digitally recording and storing words, phrases, sentences, and personally meaningful sounds using one's natural voice. This is best done during the early stages of ALS. However, message banking can still be done if you've had speech changes. So I think that's a really important takeaway. A lot of times people, if they've had changes with their speech, they may try to hold back on message and voice banking, but it can still be very meaningful. And I'm going to show you actually in a slide or two a video of someone who did message bank. And you can hear in his speech that he did likely message bank after he had changes, but we can still understand him with his phrases that he made, and it's still super meaningful to him and his family. So essentially with message banking, you are creating audio clips to later be used with a speech generating device. So you may be recording phrases like, I love you, good morning, what are we doing today? It's just phrases that you're kind of thinking you might say in the future. They may be funny stories you always say, maybe a joke you always say it a certain way. The good thing with message banking is you can really convey your unique inflection and intonation. You can show love, you can show sarcasm, you can show humor, where just with a computerized voice, you may not be able to convey those emotions. There are several options for preserving your recordings. The website I most commonly use is mymessagebanking.com. It is a free website where you can upload all of your stored phrases onto it. You can label it so it will have everything organized and you can see exactly what each phrase is. And then that will save all of your phrases. Eventually, in the future, if you want to upload them onto a talking device, you can do that. Next slide. So now I'm going to play, or actually Stephanie's going to play a video for you of someone who has message banked, and you can hear, this is the gentleman and his wife talking. He had speech changes likely when he started to message bank, but it's still really, really meaningful. This website is really great if you haven't been there before. It's on Boston Children's Hospital. They have an ALS program and a speech pathologist there, John Costello, who's really pioneered a lot of communication tools, a lot on message and voice banking. And there's great videos and resources on this website. So I would highly encourage you to take a look at it. You can see there's lots of videos here to watch.
So known as Lou Gehrig's disease. Please me in the speed answer. Please bear with me. Use this to communicate.
The computer with our family, Todd uses with his vision, and he has synthetic voice, which is the Toby computer voice, as well. Todd has message banked his own voice years ago, so we also have Todd's voice loaded into Toby, so he can use his voice.
He can be right now,
Everyday communication with the person you love, the person that you live with, your children. I wouldn't be able to have that communication with Todd if it wasn't for this technology. And I don't think you realize how important communication is until you can't have it. I think Todd and I have realized the appreciation for everything because of the ALS. If it's taken away from you, this is not. We have the communication piece, and it's a really big deal for us together.
So I think Todd is a good example of someone who we can hear that his speech is slower. It sounds a little slurred, but we can still understand him. And you can see how meaningful it is for both him and his wife to hear his voice on that communication device rather than more of a computerized voice. All right, next slide. So what do you need to message bank? I typically recommend a high quality voice recorder. John Costello from that program, that website I just showed you, recommends the Zoom Handy recorder, so I do as well. And this is just a voice recorder that you will carry with you for a period of time, and you will think of different phrases and things that you commonly say, and you can record them onto this voice recorder. That website I showed you also has a lot of suggested phrases, and there's like 20 pages you can find of different phrases that other people have used to spark some ideas for yourself. If you do want to get a voice recorder like this, you can purchase one through Amazon. You can also borrow them. A lot of ALS organizations will actually lend one to you. Team Gleason is the one I commonly refer my patients to. There's a website, there's a form on the Team Gleason website that you send in, and they will mail you one that you can have for whatever time you need to do the message banking, and then you would return it. Next slide. All right, I'm going to talk about voice banking now. So voice banking is different from message banking. Voice banking is the process of creating a unique synthesized voice to be used with a speech generating device. So the key word here is synthesized. It is a computer version of your voice. It is not truly your voice. So it will sound like you, but it won't be perfect. It will definitely sound more computerized. Voice banking allows you to generate new messages onto a speech generating device using this personalized voice that you have created. It requires recording many phrases and sentences, which are then fed through a voice analysis software to obtain a synthetic voice. Next slide. So these are some resources for voice banking. They're always changing with technology. So I am by no means an expert on knowing all of the changing platforms. I most commonly use Acapella, which is the first one listed here. For this website, you have to record 50 phrases or sentences, and then that software will create the computerized version of your voice. Model Talker has been around for a long time. This one requires a lot more recordings, I think like hundreds, a lot of recordings that you have to do. Personal Voice is a new feature of Apple products. It's on the iPhone and iPads. I tried it out actually just for the purpose of this presentation. It requires 150 phrases to create that version of your voice. It was just okay. I listened to my voice afterwards, and it sounded very computerized. The Voice Keeper is another app that I have used. This one you could just do on a smartphone or on a tablet. And I don't remember exactly how many recordings, but it was not that many. And this is something that you would work with a speech pathologist. A lot of these platforms do require, they do cost money, but there are ways of getting these funded. Again, this is through Team Gleason. If you go on their website and fill out a form, Team Gleason will actually fund your voice banking. So I highly recommend filling that form out and working with your speech pathologist to get that process started. So this is the John Costello, the speech pathologist. He shows you what his voice sounds like when he did voice banking, and you can see the number of phrases that he did for each platform. The number of phrases you do does not necessarily mean the quality is going to be better, and I think you will hear that in his recordings. So you're going to hear the way he sounds when he says the sentence, and then you're going to hear the way that the voice banked output sounds. All right, go ahead and push play.
Hello, this is John. My voice was created with 200 recordings.
Hello, this is John. My voice was created with 200 recordings.
Hello, this is John. My voice was created with 100 recordings.
Hello, this is John. My voice was created with 100 recording.
Hello, this is John. My voice was created with 200 recordings.
Hello, this is John. My voice was created with 200 recordings.
Hello, this is John. My voice was created with 500 recordings.
Hello, this is John. My voice was created with 500 recording.
Hello, this is John. My voice was created with 50 recordings.
Hello, this is John. My voice was created with 50 recordings.
So again, I think from that video, you can see how the voice sounds. So we can hear it does sound like John, but it doesn't sound exactly like John. It doesn't convey, like sarcasm or like the same emotion in his voice. But it is a good option because when you're using a talking device, you don't always know everything you're going to say years before when you're message banking. So you might be saying something totally new that you never message banked. So in that case, you might be typing out or accessing a keyboard with your eyes. And it's nice that you have this voice output that kind of sounds like you rather than like a computer, for example. Next slide. So what do you need to voice bank? It depends on the platform that you use. Generally, if you're using a desktop or a laptop computer, you want a headset microphone, something that it comes in front of your mouth. You want to be in a quiet environment. It doesn't have to be perfectly quiet, but just not a lot of background noise that would go into the recording. If you're using like a personal voice from the Apple product or one of the apps on the phone or iPad, you may just need the phone or the tablet without the headset recording or headset microphone. Next slide. Okay, so my last slide on this topic is to compare the two. If it's not clear already, you're going to see here a video of that same speech pathologist, and you're going to hear kind of side by side when he did a message banking, which was recording a sentence, how that sounds compared to the voice banking, which he created that computerized version of his voice.
You are the love of my life, and I am so glad you have been beside me.
You are the love of my life, and I am so glad that you've been beside me.
I am so proud of you.
I am so proud of you.
Did the wizard get back to you about a brain?
Did the wizard get back to you about a brain?
While you are up.
While you are up.
Words can't describe how much I love and appreciate you.
Words can't describe how much I love and appreciate you.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
Forget about it.
Forget about it.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you.
Thank you, Stephanie. So you can hear the difference between his message banked voice, which is when he used that voice recorder and recorded the sentences, happy birthday, forget about it. You can hear the tone in his voice. The voice banking, not quite as much. It is going to sound more computerized. I would stress the importance of doing both because I think the message banking is so meaningful to have your true voice. But the voice banking is great because, again, you're not going to know everything that you need to say when you are doing that message banking process. It's best to talk with your speech pathologist if you're interested in doing either one of these. I would start the process as soon as possible. So even if you're first diagnosed and you haven't had any speech changes yet, that's a great time to start message and voice banking. I think even if you've had speech changes, that's a great time to start message and voice banking. So talk with the speech therapist and get some support with starting those processes so that you have that option down the road if you want it. And I'll throw it back now to Stephanie to talk about communication tools.
All right. Thanks, Liz. That was awesome information. And I think some of those videos really help us better understand what that difference looks like, because those terms, message and voice banking, are so similar, and it can be very confusing what the differences are. So I think that, Liz, those were fantastic. I love this slide just because I think it's really important to understand that even though you may not be able to use speech as your primary mode for communicating with those around you, it does not equal that you have the inability to communicate. As we mentioned earlier, communication is multimodal, and so speech is just one part of it. And there are definitely technologies available that will allow you to continue to communicate, even if speech is not a viable means for doing that. We're going to move into talking a little bit about that AAC, which is augmentative and alternative communication. And I'll start with just giving you a definition of what that is. But AAC is defined as any device, system, or method that improves a person's ability to communicate effectively, which is really important, and participate in the world around them. It's known that approximately 80% or greater of individuals with ALS will eventually use AAC to supplement or replace their speech. This is from the American Speech Language and Hearing Association, and they state that all persons, regardless of the extent or the severity of their disabilities, have a basic right to affect through communication the conditions of their own existence. So I think it's important to remember that, to keep that in the back of our head, that it's a basic human right to be able to communicate. There are different forms of AAC, and we've mentioned a couple as we have gone through previous slides, but I'm going to touch on a few different systems. No-tech systems are those that don't require anything external. Those are just things that we use that are maybe on our body, so facial expressions or gestures, vocalizations. Not many of us use sign language, but even just a clearing of your throat or something like that is a way to gain someone's attention. So those are some no-tech systems. Then we move into low-tech systems, and these are typically pretty simple, often very inexpensive. They're also going to help with communication, and they're going to include things like paper and pencil. There are low-tech LCD communication boards, or writing tablets is what they are. Sometimes we refer to those as boogie boards. That's just one of the brands. You have opportunities for using communication boards or books. And then there are also low-tech eye gaze boards that don't require batteries or things like that. And then there are high-tech systems, and those are systems that typically do require electricity. They're battery operated. They produce speech, and these often include those SGDs, which again are just speech generating devices. There are options for using your own personal computers or tablets that you can load with what we call speaking software, and that's just the software that allows that speech to be produced. We'll focus a little bit more on low-tech AAC. As I mentioned earlier, these are typically pretty simple to use and to learn how to use. And some of the low-tech systems that are commonly used are paper-based communication boards. So you might have your speech pathologist just print off for you something that has either just letters of the alphabet or some pre-programmed sort of phrases. There's lots of options for getting language laminated paper-based single pages communication boards, those LCD dry erase writing boards. There's a picture on the screen of a boogie board. It's important to know that ATEC or that low-tech AAC systems are an essential part of a complete communication system. So Liz mentioned previously, sometimes we don't have access to those high-tech speech generating devices, and it's always important to have a backup system or a low-tech method that's going to allow you to communicate when you don't have access to something that's going to allow for a voice or speech output. Having those available, maybe if you're in the car, or if, like Liz mentioned earlier, your battery has run out, or you don't have access to charging a system, if the power goes out, those sorts of things. You always want to have a backup low-tech system to use in support of something high-tech. You can access these low-tech systems in a variety of ways. So even if you're not able to use your hand to point to things or to write on an LCD writing board, you can use alternative access methods, such as Liz had mentioned, a laser pointer that you can attach to glasses or a hat or a headband. Those can rather inexpensively be purchased on Amazon. We've been pretty creative with those. I've used some of the cat laser pointer toys. As long as you can get one that can remain in an on position, those work really well. And with those attached to, let's say, glasses or a hat, it would allow you to use some head movement to point to either letters or phrases on a paper-based board. You can use eye movements as well. So if head movement is difficult, then you can use eye gaze. Typically, those require a little more practice with a communication partner just to get that system down pat. But these low-tech AAC systems typically don't have voice output connected or attached with those. Then we have high-tech AAC. And again, these are often referred to as SGDs, or speech generating devices. And these, just like the low-tech systems, can range from something pretty simple to something that is more complex. So there are simple keyboarding devices all the way up to fully functioning computers that allow you to do things other than just communicate. So I shouldn't say just communicate. They allow you to do things other than communicate. And some other things that some of these high-tech devices allow you to do might be controlling some of the environment, changing the channels on your TV, accessing email or some social media sites, that sort of thing. These speech generating devices are usually considered durable medical equipment and are often funded by Medicare, Medicaid, and most private insurance companies. And if you have a combination of those funding sources, the goal would be to get it funded at 100%, but that's not always the case. So it's super important that you're connected with your speech pathologist when you're going through that process. These high-tech systems often require more training and support on behalf of the individual using the system and the communication partner, because they're often involved in either making adjustments to the system, especially if you are using a different access method. Speaking of access methods, most speech generating devices can be accessed in many multiple ways. So it's not uncommon for an individual to start off using a speech generating device, perhaps using their hands to control the system. And as changes occur, when we're not maybe able to use our hands, there are other options. There are buttons or switches that you can plug in typically to those devices, and it allows you to scan through buttons and make a selection through that method. There's something called a head mouse, and a head mouse attaches, or typically is attached to the speech generating device. It allows you, through typically a reflective dot that you, just a sticker that you maybe have on your forehead or on your glasses, through head movement to interact with the speech generating device. And if you're not able to really, if you don't have a good range of motion with head control or support, then eye gaze is an access method as well. And with eye gaze systems, you're using your eyes to control the device. Definitely when you're using high-tech systems, and using eye gaze as an access method. And probably even with a head mouse, you might be also having discussions about mounting options. The speech generating devices are typically mounted to either your wheelchair through a wheelchair mount, or a lot of times we use something called a floor stand mount, and that is a standalone mount. Kind of looks like a bedside table, a hospital bedside table minus the tray top. There's just some tubes that connect that allow the speech generating device to be mounted to that. And then the positioning when using eye gaze is super important, and that's what that mount allows you to achieve. If you're in a bed or sitting in your wheelchair or perhaps in a recliner, using those mounting options gives you access to your speech generating device, no matter where you're, what you're positioned in. There are options other than those dedicated devices that you get through those speech generating device manufacturers. Certainly, you might have your own desktop computers or laptops, tablets, any of those things that you own. Now technology has changed so much, even in the last, 5 to 7 years. So there are apps and software that you can download on your personal systems that do have speech or voice output. Depending on your needs, how you are going to control those, you may need additional hardware or software. If you're using your own systems, your own tablets, your own computers, those are generally not going to be covered by insurance plans. And another thing to keep note of is that when you're buying those systems on your own or downloading those apps on your own, most don't come with support or training, which do come if you purchase a device through a speech generating device manufacturer. Generally, you have solutions consultants or sales consultants that provide some training when a device is purchased. Even if you want to use your own systems, though, most of the websites or YouTube have supports and resources that you can view in order to get some more experience or get a little bit more comfortable using that system. We're going to move out of technology now. We certainly don't want to overwhelm you with all of the options. Technology changes frequently, and so it's really important to stay connected with the speech pathologist, and that's what this next slide is all about. It's going to talk about some roles and responsibilities as you talk about speech and communication along your journey. But that speech pathologist has several roles. They're going to educate patients and families on changes in speech and swallowing. So we would suggest at the very beginning stages that you do get connected with a speech pathologist. Even if you don't feel or notice changes in your speech, those speech pathologists can provide ongoing monitoring of your speech. And as your speech changes, they are the ones who can then start recommending some of those strategies or some of those systems, some of those things that might help improve your communication. Your speech pathologist is going to facilitate or guide the process of voice and message banking. At a minimum, provide you some education on your options. They will also review your options for the augmentative or the alternative communication. They're often the ones who will perform the AAC evaluation, which is required if you're going through insurance. There is an evaluation that has to be submitted to funding, which includes the evaluation by the speech pathologist and a prescription by the doctor agreeing with that recommendation. So the speech pathologist is the one who does that AAC evaluation. And once that system arrives, they're also the ones who can provide some training and support, including any specific customizations that you might have with your device. And that might even include importing some of the banked messages or your synthesized voice banking that you've created. The roles of the communication partner should also be briefly discussed. The loved ones are going to share the responsibility for communication. They're going to assist with the development and the implementation of those AAC supports. It does require the communication partner should understand that system probably just as well as the individual using it, so that they can provide support. They can make positioning changes as needed to allow that conversation to continue. The communication partner might control the environment to promote successful communication. And Liz talked a little bit about that earlier. It's things like minimizing background noise, maybe turning off the television when you're having a conversation so that you're not competing with anything in the background. And that communication partner is also going to be the cheerleader when communication breakdowns occur. They're going to understand both the high-tech system, if there is one involved, as well as those low-tech systems, and know when it's important to maybe pull one out over the other, so that the individual living with ALS can continue to communicate to the best of their abilities. And at that point, we're going to wrap things up with just a few final thoughts. We think it's super important for you to be proactive instead of reactive. And I just mentioned this on the previous slide. Connect with that speech pathologist as soon as possible, even if you feel like you're not noticing changes with your speech at this point. The sooner they get to know you and your current voice, the better off they'll be able to make recommendations as things change. Definitely consider message banking and voice banking sooner rather than later. I've never, ever had someone say to me, I wish I would, or I wish I wouldn't have done that. That was such a waste of time. More often than not, I hear someone say, oh, I wish I would have done that. So consider those options, have those conversations sooner rather than later, so that while you have the strength and the energy, you can go ahead and make some of those bankings, whether you're doing message or voice banking. And then, of course, you're not alone. You have resources. You've got your speech pathologist. You have professional organizations such as ours, ALS United Greater Chicago. There are support groups. And then we've also listed a few websites that we think are really great for giving you some additional information. So that wraps up our presentation on communication strategies and technologies. And from here, we're going to open it up to any questions that came in while we were presenting. So I'm going to let Joumana tell us about anything that came in.
Okay, well, thank you, ladies. This was amazing. A lot of good information. Thank you for sharing that. And we apologize for the technology. There was one live question that came through. It's from Harry. He said his wife's voice has deteriorated to stage 5. Can we use previously recorded phone videos, voicemails, etc., for voice banking or speech generating devices?
Yeah. That's a great question, Harry. I saw your question earlier too. I have not actually worked with anyone who has gone through a process like that. I have heard of some technology, maybe up and coming, maybe not quite commercially available, where that might be possible. However, I have never seen someone do that before. I can look that up for you a little bit more in detail and see if I can find anything for that. What I've seen more commonly would be maybe having like a family member. So let's say someone sounds like her, like a sister or something like that. They could go through the process of voice banking. It wouldn't be exactly her, but it would kind of sound like her. The other thing I would think too is that you could take some of those messages and even upload those direct messages onto a communication device. So if there's any like meaningful voicemails or recordings that you have, those could even get stored onto the speech generating device, where she could access that and play her true voice out loud.
Thank you, Liz. There was another question from Martha, suggestions on how to be able to make emergency phone calls at stage 5.
So if you have a speech generating device and you have that device connected to a cell phone through Bluetooth, which, can happen, then you can have some recordings or have access to phone communication that way. That would be one of the ways that I would think that could potentially take place.
Okay, so these were the live questions. I had a few other questions that came in before. One of them you may have answered already about when is the best timing to start voice and message banking, and when is it considered too late for the quality?
So the best time is, I think, as early as possible. So, I guess when you're comfortable and ready after getting diagnosed. I know getting diagnosed is such an emotional time, and sometimes it's a hard topic to bring up with people because they're having a lot of emotions and feelings, and to talk about voice and message banking is difficult. But as soon as possible would be my answer. So when you're feeling comfortable and ready to do it, I would start. Is there a too late? I don't think so. I think for voice banking, there's probably a too late. So that's the creating the computerized version of your voice. If it's not clear enough, it's not going to be able to create that version of your voice if it's unclear. I think message banking, I think it can sound changed and still be fine. So I think if you're up to message banking and taking that voice recorder and doing those recordings, and just knowing that the output is going to sound like how you sound right now, I think you can do it as long as you feel comfortable with it.
Thank you. There was a question that came into the chat. There are a few that's a statement. There's a few European companies that use your past audio recording to generate synthetic voices.
Yeah.
It's extremely expensive.
Yeah, that sounds about right, Charlie. Do you know how much it was by chance, if you remember?
While Charlie is typing, you will get to the next question.
Sure.
What resources are available if someone get denied a communication device through insurance or has a very high copay?
Yes. So there are some options. Liz mentioned Team Gleason. They have provided some assistance in funding equipment, but we at ALS United, we have devices that have been donated to us. And so we have loan libraries, and I've got some housed. I'm in Central Illinois, and Liz is in the Chicago area. And so if that is the case, or even if someone is waiting for their own device and they feel like they need something immediately while they're waiting, I would always connect with your care coordinator, your patient services coordinator with ALS United. They will reach out to Liz and I and see what we have available. Your speech pathologist that you're working with might also reach out to us and say, hey, we're working with someone who needs a device that will allow for, whatever they've determined is appropriate, and we'll check and see what we have available. We don't always have the latest and greatest, but we typically keep our what we have in inventory as current as possible. And then, we will certainly get that to you along with some, we generally have floor stand mount options. We don't typically keep wheelchair mounts just because, those can vary so much from chair to chair, but there are options. There's also, you guys should know about the Illinois telephone program. If you're an Illinois resident and you have some sort of phone, whether it's a landline or a cell phone, you can work through their system to get an iPad with a communication app for free. It's a loan sort of a system, but you can keep it as long as you need it. They typically just want it shipped back if you're no longer in need of it. It does require a speech pathologist just to sign off on it saying, hey, this is the app that I would recommend for this individual, but that's also something to consider, especially if you're at the point where you maybe need something with speech output, but you have really good use of your hands and you're pretty mobile. You don't maybe need something that's connected to a mount. That might be a good place to start, knowing that you can transition perhaps to a speech generating device through your funding source when that's appropriate. So just something to consider and know about.
Thank you. And Charlie responded to the cost in the European banking. It's $2,500 to $5,000. I have two more questions if you have time for that. One of them is oftentimes patients are referred to a specialty place like a Shirley Ryan or Marian Joy for evaluation for a communication device. And yet they get there, although their speech is really affected, they're told you don't qualify yet.
Yeah, that can be tricky. So depending on your funding source, they may want to see your speech at a certain level. Last I heard, and maybe Liz, you can mention if it's changed, but when you were at the point of 125 words per minute, that was a threshold for potentially being eligible. The speech pathologist within that evaluation report has to be able to justify why they're recommending a speech generating device. And so they have to be able to have information in that report that indicates that, your current method for communicating is not meeting your needs. It's not allowing you to be independent, to advocate, that sort of thing. So if a funding source does a denial or a deferral based on the report, there is often an appeal process. So that is something that you can go through. If I don't know if you're meaning that the speech pathologist is saying that you're not yet eligible or that you wouldn't yet qualify, or if we're talking about insurance or funding sources coming back and saying, no, we don't think that you're eligible or you qualify. If you get to the point where that process just feels like a roller coaster, again, I would check with us to see if perhaps we have a system that would be available for you to loan, either during the wait or instead of waiting for your own system. So
thank you.
Yeah, I mean, what I've seen about insurance coverage is at least the reports I've read is they're looking for like the word severe, basically. So they want it to be a severe speech disorder. The words they're using are less than 50% intelligible. So I think it's tough if someone's right on the border of that or maybe above that. That I wonder if that's the reason why this individual is finding denials.
And it can depend on the funding source. Certain funding sources, private insurance versus Medicare, those reviewers might be looking for something different.
Yeah, sometimes they want a trial as well. So they want, a month trial to see that the person is successful with the device. So that can be another challenge with getting covered.
We, as care service coordinator, we encourage patients to start the process early, and it gets frustrating when you see them get denied, because you want them to start early so they can get acquainted with the machines, with the technology. Obviously, we saw firsthand today how reliable it is, before they actually advance to the point where it's not easy to retain, and it gets frustrating when they get denied. So thank you for your response.
And I might say one other thing, when if you do start off with your own systems, let's say you're using your own phones or tablets, consider apps or software that might also be available on potential speech generating devices in the future. I think that is something that you should at least have in the back of your head, especially if transitioning from one software to another is more difficult for you. A lot of the speech generating device manufacturers also do offer apps. And typically it's the software that you might see on the device. And so if you're someone who, once you learn it, you want to stick with it, just keep that in the back of your mind as well. Those are conversations that you should be able to have with your speech pathologist, though. They should be able to guide you or provide you the information on what's available and what might transition from, let's say, your personalized or your personal tablet to something more like a speech generating device.
Yeah, thank you. This actually answered the last question we had on the list, which was the apps that people can use before they need and how do they get access to those resources?
So like the apps?
Yes.
Okay, so those would be things that you would purchase on your own. And again, I keep going back to this, but have the conversation with your speech pathologist. I wouldn't just randomly go to the app store and say, oh, this one looks like, it says text to speech. It might be good for me. Have those conversations with someone who has experience with those apps. Some are really cheap. There's one that I recommend all the time. It's called Speech Assistant AAC. It's a rather inexpensive. It's maybe gone up a little bit, but 15, 20-ish. I don't know what the current fee for it is, but it's a really good comprehensive one. It's not currently though available on a speech generating device. So some are affordable and some are several $100s. So I definitely think about those things before you just grab an app. Technology changes frequently. And so I think, you really want to understand what you want to do with it. Many of those apps have a combination of things like keyboards that are going to allow you to type in anything you want to say, in addition to some pre-programmed content, like pre-programmed phrases that you might say related to various topics. Generally, a combination of the two of those is going to give you the opportunities to be most effective when you're communicating. So I wouldn't say randomly pick one out without having a conversation with someone who has some experience with them, just so that they can more appropriately guide you.
Thank you, Stephanie. And Charlie chimed in here and said there are hundreds of synthetic voices available for purchase. Most you can try for free from their website. Cost is around $25 to $50 per voice. They even have funny voices.
I have seen that too. Yeah. And even like if you do have a speech generating device, there are a lot of voices that you can select from whatever device you get covered, and they are getting better and better. So even if you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm at this point where I have not message or voice banked, you still can use a speech generating device and have a voice, and you do have options of picking out a voice. It may not be the way you sound, but there are a lot of voices available.
Yeah, so I'm gonna answer that last message live. Are these slides available to us? Yes, you will get a follow-up email, and then you get those as well. So I believe this concludes our those were the last questions. So this should conclude our session. We hope that you found tonight's program insightful. We sincerely apologize for the technology hiccups. Hopefully this will not deter you from pursuing that route if it is appropriate for you. A heartfelt thank you goes to our exceptional speakers for dedicating time tonight to share their expertise and knowledge with us. We extend our gratitude to all of you for joining us. As you prepare to log off, a friendly reminder that you can anticipate receiving the recording, the slides of tonight's program via email, along with the survey. That it's a short survey that we appreciate if you complete, because that will help us determine how to better prepare our programs in the future. If there are any lingering questions that remained unanswered during this session, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are committed to addressing your inquiries as promptly as possible. Wishing you all a good night, and please take care.